Hi, everyone. You've joined us for another Tricky Thursday session. My name is Laura, and I'm here with Dr. Kaylee, our head of positive education at Sunmark School, to find out how we can support you with listening and attention with children in the early years. Now, we want to give you some useful tips that you can actually use in the home environment or whether you're out day to day or even in the school environment. What we're going to do today is we're going to dive into a presentation that gives us 5 tips, what we can do in the moment, the here and now. And then later in the session, we're going to ask Dr. Kaylee our most tricky Thursday questions. I'm so pleased that you're here to join us. Let's go over to Dr. Kaylee and find out what can we do.
Thank you very much, Laura. Yes, so it's a real pleasure and a privilege to be here this afternoon for this Tricky Thursday session. Early years is a great passion of mine. As a child psychologist, I worked in many early years settings across the UK, and I really feel passionate about the importance of developing attention and listening skills in the early years to support learning. And what we know about early years is it is the most crucial period for brain development, where most learning occurs. So I think it's definitely worth us diving into having a look at what some of the top tips and strategies are for developing attention and listening skills in the early years, and looking at what questions parents have for us today. So if we start the presentation, one of the first things that we're going to think about is what is the importance of attention and listening skills in the early years? Why are they so relevant? And also we'll then go on to the 5 top tips. Then we'll think about some attention and listening games, because attention and listening is an important skill, but if it's not a game, do we really engage children in the early years is the question. And then we'll go on to your question and answer time after that. And I'm so pleased that Laura is here today with over 12 years experience working in early years settings with a range of children in the early years, who will be able to give us lots of practical tips and advice on things that work in the nursery too, and which you guys will be able to use at home. So let's go on to why attention and listening skills are important in the early years. I think the first thing to note is that it is a skill and it can be developed. So that is the great news for all of us. Yes, our children might be at different levels and different stages with their attention and listening development, but ultimately we can support them to make it better, for them to attend to things longer, and that can grow over time with our support. And so that's something key to know. In addition to that, what is the difference really between listening and attention? Because there's so much overlap between them both. But children must be able to attend initially in order to truly listen. So listening is the skill of hearing what somebody is saying. So it's detecting sound and attaching meaning to that. But attention is being able to attend or focus on something, usually for a period of time. So the two very much go hand in hand. So if we just move on to our next slide, which is very much about why it's important to focus on attention and listening skills in the early years. And this is one of my personal favorite quotes about this topic, is that listening is a crucial skill for young children to acquire. It's one of the basic building blocks of language and communication, and particularly in the early years of education, one of the main vehicles for a child's learning, because they must be able to do both of those things in order to really engage in their learning environment. So what should we expect from children in the early years when it comes to attention and listening? Because that's a really important question. So if we look at the diagram that we have on the screen now, this is going to give us some idea of what what we should typically see in children in nursery settings, in early years settings, in terms of what they're able to attend to. Now, child development isn't linear, and children are at different stages within that, but this is just a rough guideline and estimate of what we would expect children to be doing at this age. So if we look 0 to 1 years, their attention is very much fleeting, and they flip between activities. They can become easily distracted, and the things that they concentrate on generally are activities of their own choosing for very short periods. And then within 1 to 2 years, they can again concentrate on a task of their own choosing. They may sometimes appear not to hear because at this stage of development, their attention is very rigid, which means that in order to focus on something, they have to filter out what is going on in their environment. And so they might not always hear when we're giving them directions and instructions if they're concentrating on a task of their choosing. And 2 to 3 years can only attend to one thing at a time. So they can either listen or do. And sometimes we expect children to do both. But at this age, it is one thing at a time that they have the capability to do in general. And they can shift to a different task if their attention is gained first, but they need to be asked to stop and listen in order to do so. 3 to 4 years, they have their focus and attention, so they're still able to listen or do, but they're able to shift their own attention. And so they're gradually beginning to control their own focus of attention. This is 3 to 4 years. So they're able to follow directions and listen to others one to one or in small groups and listen to stories. Then 4 to 5 years, we start to see those higher order skills where they can listen and do at the same time, the majority of the time, and depending also on their temperament and character and interests. And their concentration span is still quite short, and they're beginning to maintain attention and sit quietly during an appropriate activity. And 5 to 6 years, they have established two-channeled attention, so they're able to switch their attention between different situations in different groups of people and maintain attention and concentrate, sit quietly during an appropriate activity. So that sort of covers the general age ranges with attention. So when we're thinking about listening skills, on an average, we would say 2 to 3 minutes per year. So if the child is 1 year old, we would be thinking they can concentrate for 2 to 3 minutes. 2 years old, 4 to 6 minutes. 3 years old, 6 to 9 minutes. And so those are our brackets of how long we would expect them to focus on activities that they are engrossed in and interested in.
And I
So,
think, Kaylee, just as you've referenced, it's very important that this is a an average chart, and exactly as you've mentioned, children's development isn't in any way, shape, or form linear. And also, much as you've referenced, we've got to think about whether the topic or the stimulus actually does inspire them or does interest them. Because as adults, we can often expect or hope our children to be interested in something that we may have prepared for them or we may have bought for them, but they may not be passionate about that. So they're listening or being able to attend to that thing in that moment. It just might not be there. So, especially in the education world, and for mummies and daddies out there, we've got to find what makes your child passionate, what resonates with them. If they are, in fact, interested in scooping and pouring, sorting, sectioning, chopping things up, tipping things over, we've got to modulate or add those into our activities. So the things that we want our children to attend to have to first embrace their passions.
mhm, absolutely, and that's key for the early years environment with child led learning. And there are some things that some children are just not interested in at all. And that's okay. And it's very much about building upon where their passions lie, where they're exploring particular aspects of the environment, and we can develop listening and concentration skills from that basis. But absolutely, it has to be something that is engaging for them, and in a world that they're exploring independently. Absolutely. Thank you, Laura. So if we move on to tip 1, fundamentally is modeling good listening skills, good attention and listening skills. And that seems very simple, but if we think of ourselves in our fast, busy environments and our tech world that we live in, and we're on the phone and we're on the iPad and we're texting someone, we're talking and we're giving instructions. And so there's a lot to be said for just going back to basics of what listening and attention skills am I modeling to my child, our children, where they're able to learn and absorb, because children ultimately soak up the behaviour of the adults around them. Our modelling is key to their development, and they're looking to us to learn those key essential skills. So just a moment of reflection. When we are spending time with our children, are we modeling those skills? Are we down to their level, making eye contact and really attending and listening to them the way we want them to do for us? And of course, we all have many things that we're juggling in our lives, and it's not possible to be attentive and listen the way we would like to all of the time. But in those quality moments when we're spending with our children in distraction-free environments is the perfect time to model those key skills that we want them to develop. And also teaching children the skills and encouraging them to ask for help as well is really important, because one of the things we find in early years when we're seeing children that are dysregulated and are struggling with those sort of basic aspects of developing attention, listening, formulating social groups, it's because they're struggling to communicate. And so supporting them with ways that they can ask for help, whether that is verbally, whether it is through gestures, then this is something that will be a good tool for them in order to develop further. So if we look at tip number 2, is making sure you have their full attention first. And we touched upon that a little bit. But with children, especially in the early years, they're not as able as adults to filter out background noises, and they can get distracted by many things. But also at the same time, if they're engrossed in an activity of their interest and very focused on something, then if we're giving them instructions, sometimes we think that they're being disobedient, but they genuinely just haven't heard, because they're so engrossed in what they're doing or so distracted by other things in the environment. So it's very important we do come down to their level, make the eye contact, use their name before giving the instruction. And one of the ways we can see if children have actually physically heard what we have said is, if they have the language skills to do so, ask them to repeat back to you what you ask them to do, because then that's a further way that they can process an instruction and able to make sure that they have actually heard what you've said. And so that's one of the key things that we focus on, because often when children aren't attending or listening, it's because there's a lot going on in their environment. And so the first thing we need to do is capture their attention. And then
Sometimes a useful skill for that one is also giving them some time reminders. So if they are around 4 years old or 5 years old, you can indicate that in around 2 minutes, we're going to tidy up for the next activity, or in 5 big minutes. You want to make sure that the children are part of that activity or moving with you, but that they're able to take control of their environment. So something that I've heard recently that I really like is talking about minutes in 5 little minutes, we're going to tidy up, or in 5 big minutes. Now, the time doesn't change, and the adult knows that perhaps it is time to go to school, or it is time to put our shoes on for nursery, but we want to give that child an indication that they're going to be part of something. So if they've understood that you've given them the opportunity to do what they're doing, to finish, to have some time, then they will be able to attend and listen to some of the things that you might need them to attend to as the adult. And I know some of our later questions have asked, how do we help with that? So hopefully that's a good tip for you also.
Absolutely, that's a really excellent tip. And is there anything you use, Laura, in the nursery specifically to give them reminders of time? Do you use any visuals for that, or any specific activities that you support children with reminders for that would be helpful for home as well?
Yeah, so absolutely. What we do in the classroom is there's lots of things that indicate. So we might be showing a photograph. So it might be that we're going outside or we're going to the zigzag zoom. So we might just hold that image and say, in 5 minutes, we're off outside. Or we might show them things like the magic rope that they're going outside. So they understand those little visuals that say something is changing and something is happening. Because we have to think about the nursery environment being very multicultural also. So many of our children coming to the nursery don't necessarily speak the same language, haven't
Mhm,
acquired any language yet, so might not be able to do that in a verbal way. In our
mhm,
older classes, there's lots of songs that help with transition and change, and even clapping rhymes. So we'll stop, they'll make a certain amount of claps or sing their song, and then understand that now it's time for me to tidy up, or now it's time to move on. The
mhm,
things have to be continuous, so it has to have that daily reference. So every day they understand, when we hear this or when we see this, it's time to do X, Y, or Z. And the
mhm,
children have to be part of that. So when they get older, as they develop in their interests and preferences, they can suggest things. They can even design the images that mean we're moving on. And then absolutely, for those that are developing in communication skills, we'll be using the visual timetables, often supported with our Makaton symbols.
mhm, mhm. Fantastic. They are really wonderful tips to even use at home. Going on to tip number 3, using gestures and visuals, which are great tools to use with children with English as an additional language. And that way, the visual is another input for children to understand and attach meaning to the words we're using, and can be really helpful for supporting children with routines. There are again some questions about that at the end, where I think visuals would be a great resource at home. And I think, as you've already pointed out, Laura, it's very much about keeping in with certain structures and routines that really support children to learn and attend to things over time. Fantastic. So if we go to tip number 4, be specific with praise. So you'll see this around nursery settings and early year settings. You often see visuals of good looking, good listening, good sitting, and that is just very much about praise and being specific about our praise that we use, so our children know what it is that we're expecting of them. And it can be something that they know, oh, adults really pleased when I sit and when I attend, when I'm able to. I think good looking is a real good starting point, where children are able to do that and to attend, because in order to attend we must first capture their attention. So if we start with those good looking and then moving on to good listening skills, and they know exactly what they've done well, and it is something that again we would use visuals for children in those early stages of development. And do you use those in the nursery, Laura?
Absolutely. And what we try to do is try to ensure with all of the staff in the nurseries that we're using terms, we're not using terms like good girl or good boy. We're using things like that was kind, that was helpful, you were brave. I'm very proud of you for your X, Y, and Z. Because
Mhm,
just as you've mentioned, we have to be specific. Why did we celebrate that moment? What was it they did? Because sometimes at times a child might not notice that that was the right thing or the positive thing to do, or and they might just adopt that as a natural behavior. But for other
mhm,
children it's hard to see what are the desirable behaviours and which ones might be undesirable. So we always promote and try to accentuate the things that the children did well and that we're very proud of, that we're inspired by that action. You were thoughtful, you helped your friend tidy. You were kind, you gave out the water bottles. The children need to understand that we have those positive expectations and that naturally they might be doing them anyway without us asking, and we want to recognise that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really love the way it just links in with the character and morality and developing those aspects in children around the social emotional learning, which is really key and fundamental in the early years. So there's some great examples of praise that can be used at home with children as well. Thank you. So if we go on to tip number 5, play listening games. And I'm sorry, it seems to be covering a little bit of the writing, but I will go through it with you. So with listening games, I'm sure Laura will have things to share that is done in the nursery in terms of games that are played. There are lots of different things that we can use to support children's attention and listening skills. And games are the best way. We know children learn through play. We know that early years is the most crucial stage for allowing children to explore their environment and be interested in what they want to pursue and explore things further. And so games is really a great way to tap into skill sets because it must be interesting and fun for them in order for them to want to engage. And so some of the games that we play in early years will tap into different types of attention. So we'll have attention where children are focusing on a specific activity. So it might be that we have a scarf and we drop the falling scarf and children have to catch it. So that's a focus of an activity. But then you might have certain activities as children progress that involve shared attention. So where they're able to attend to an object with another person, another child, or an adult, which feeds into the social aspects of their development. But in terms of specific games to build upon their attention, games like Simon Says, where there's a leader and they have to stop, listen, and attend. Also rhymes with actions during story time. And you'll find that children just really learn these routines very quickly because they really engage with the songs and the music, and that's great fun for them. And also there's a freeze dance. They have some games in nursery, traffic lights, where you have green for go, red for stop, for children when they're doing physical activities. And there's also some things you can do when you're out as a family whilst the weather still remains cool, for now, coolish, is listening walk. So when we're walking, what can you hear? Can you hear the birds? Can you hear any of the noises? Can you hear the car? So that's another way to think about what they're attending to in their environment and really focusing on some specific things when you're spending time together. As well as that, they have certain activities online where children can hear sounds. So we might play the sounds of water, of drums, and children have to listen and guess what those sounds are. There are a variety of things that really fit in line with children stopping, listening, and attending. But again, it has to be something that really is in relation to their interests. And when we can tap into those, what it is they like, if they love animals, maybe we can listen to some animal sounds. And when we're engaging them in that, then they're more likely to pay attention. Is there anything in the nursery, Laura, that you found really helpful for building these skills?
Absolutely. And you've touched on lots of the points and lots of the basic things that we need to think about. We need to have children using their auditory discrimination. Children need to understand that the sounds in their environment are playing a part in their day. So often little children will alert to helicopters in the sky or to aeroplanes in the sky, but they might not know the sound of running water. or they might not know the sound of clicking fingers. So there's lots of different sounds that we need to teach them. And that actually makes up a huge module in our letters and sounds program. So that's a program for developing early reading and writing, but we take it all the way back to what an infant could do, a baby could do, a 1-year-old could do, and a 2-year-old could do. They're using body percussion, they're using alliteration, they're using sound robots, they're learning their sounds, but we've got to take it all the way back to what is a sound? What is that noise in my environment and how does it affect me? They might hear beeps of a telephone or the click of a cash register, but the child might not notice that that is what I'm hearing. Lots of the time we have to slow down the classroom and make those opportunities. So we go off into small groups and have those listening games and listen to them. Often it is from a device where we're listening to a bicycle wheel going round or the bicycle bell indeed. But it takes that quiet, calm focus to actually build those skills and to notice that I'm alerting to this sound or that sound. And in a busy classroom environment or in a busier home environment, you might not have the time. So you've really got to slow life down and focus on what made that sound, who made it, how was it made, can I make that sound, in fact, and then asking the children to connect with that and giving them physical, so giving them instruments, giving them manipulatives that can make sounds that they might replicate a sound with.
Absolutely, and music is a great way to do that. Lots of children really get engaged with music, and when you're talking about that, Laura, it just really reminds me of the concept of mindfulness and really being still and in the moment, which is so crucial for all of our well-being, both children and adults, and just taking that time to stop and slow down when we do live in such a fast-paced environment.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So, 5 top tips summarized: modeling good listening, making sure we have children's full attention before we expect them to respond to instructions, and using gestures and visuals as a tool and a resource, and being specific with praise. So that is around good looking and listening, but I think very importantly, as Laura said, also around the elements of character development that we really want to see in our children, such as kindness and bravery. And then tip number 5, playing listening games. And I think any skill we're trying to develop with children in the early years, the more we can link it back to their play and their interests, the better success we'll have with that. So thank you very much for listening to the presentation. We'll now go on to the questions that you asked and submitted before today's webinar. Also, do feel free to type any questions in the comments box as well, because if we have some time at the end, we can try to answer those for you, or we can always answer in the comment section afterwards as well. So please feel free to do that. So I think I'm going to hand over to Laura for this part.
Certainly. So our questions have come from a varied audience. So we have some of our followers sharing from the nursery side, and I'm joining you today from Jumeirah International Nursery in Al Safa. We've got 5 branches all across Dubai. I'm moving on to 9 branches by the end of this year. And Dr. Kaylee's audience yields from Sunmark, and that's an esteemed and prestigious education offering from foundation department all the way through to your GCSEs, A levels, or IB options. So we have a huge range of listeners, mummies, daddies, and followers from all over Dubai. And so the questions are quite mixed. So some of them are specific to listening or attention. Some of them are heading down the early years route, and some of them are a little bit broader. What we're going to do is we're going to try to answer them within the listening and attention frame for today. And if we feel that we want to extend this further, we can add them certainly into our upcoming topics and themes. And that's something I'd also like you to suggest. If you want us to talk about something more specific, if you'd like a support in a different area of learning, please add that in the comments for us, because we'll be joining you live every Thursday for a tricky session. And we want to make sure we're getting the correct answers to you and supporting you with what you really need. Okay, so we're going to go to question number one, and question number one has been submitted by Natalie. Thank you, Natalie, if you're listening. It would be good to especially understand how to build these qualities with stubborn children. Now, the first thing that I'll say to that is stubborn is a very interesting word, and it can be applied
Mhm.
to all different adults, children, and other. Stubborn is a word that we interpret often, and it's often in the parental role we use that word stubborn, that perhaps they don't want to do something that we want them to do, or they're not led by how the adult wants. But in the early years, and I'm sure Dr. Kaylee is going to reference this also, that word stubborn, or our interpretation of a child's mood or action or current sense, or how they're representing themselves, might not necessarily be stubborn. Kaylee, what would you like to share?
Yeah, very much that they were my thoughts too. And I thought really what I wanted to do is unpick what do we mean by stubborn? What kind of behaviors are we seeing? That, leads us to describe them as stubborn. And some of those behaviors I imagine are just part and parcel of child development in the early years. And thinking back to anything we're trying to pursue with children in the early years, we have to be very patient with developing skills like attention and listening, because they're lifelong skills that we're even still developing during adulthood. And so our expectations, yes, we have high expectations for our children, but equally it needs to be in line with where they are now and how we can build on that. So when we're thinking about uh, building these skills in any child, I think just going back to what are they interested in, and allow them. So if it is a child that has a personality where they really like to follow their own agenda, as many children in early years do, and we encourage that. Equally, there are times when they need to follow a routine and we need to keep them safe and we need to have very clear boundaries. So where we can engage children, if there's something specific we need them to be doing, then we can allow them an element of choice. And sometimes this is helpful with children that like to be in control of situations. And so it might be okay. So today, do you want to read um, about the fawn or the ladybird and the caterpillar? And sometimes allowing those choices really engages children into still feeling autonomous, because in the early years, they're at the stage where they can get frustrated that they aren't able to be as independent as they want to be, or they aren't able to communicate their needs in the way they would want to. So
Mhm.
that's our starting point, and we engage them from there with the best way we can to develop their independence, but keeping to the boundaries we set for them as well.
Okay, absolutely. Let's go ahead for our second question. Natalie, I hope that helped you. So our second question comes from Sneha, and Sneha asked, a question is building capabilities at an early age to listen. Now, Dr. Kaylee referenced earlier in the session that we were expecting approximately 2 to 3 minutes of focused attention for each year of age. So approximately a 4-year-old might manage between 8 to 12 minutes of focused attention if that was based on their current interests. Through Kaylee's presentation, I hope that we've given you lots of tips of extending. And this screen, I'd really like to bring our attention to. Kaylee, would you like to maybe infer sections here that might help, or like to reference Sneha's question of how do we build upon the attention?
Mhm. Yeah, so building upon the attention is really about, I think, going back to what's engaging for children and playing specific games with them in which we know they already attend to. So if for example, this was a child that's experiencing some challenges with paying attention, then we would expect progress to be over time with this.
Yeah.
Very, very small steps, and starting with what it is that they're engaged in. How can we make this into a game to build upon their attention and extend it over time with lots of positive praise? So I think it's really going back to those key areas, but in line with the expectations that children in early years are not going to be able to sit down and attend to an activity for half an hour that we want them to attend to, because that's just not where they are in their development. So we take them from where they are and really encourage them through modeling and through the games that we play with them. And notice, I think it's really important to notice what it is they're interested in. So when they are attending to things for a little longer period of time, then we know that's something they enjoy, that's something that they're interested in, and can we find similar things for them to do to build upon their interests as well. So I think those are some ways, but knowing sort of where they're at in that stage of development is really important.
Absolutely. I hope we were able to answer your question. Now we're going to move on to question 3 from our listener and viewer, Nida. Nida asks, how to increase the attention span of listening in a child? So that's, again, a very, very similar question, and we've given lots of tips and strategies here. But the most important thing that definitely is playing a very influential factor is the passions and interests, and also the developmental stage of a child's ability to listen. So we wouldn't be expecting a child of 2-year-old to be managing a 2-channeled attention or to be managing rigid attention. We just need to think about what stage of development they're at. Nida, if you would like to expand on your question or like any other tips or strategies, please give us a comment in the box and we'll answer that further. Let's go to our 4th question. Question number 4 will be from Bhavna. Bhavna, oh, this is a tricky one. Absolutely right for our session on a Thursday. How to say no without hurting their feelings. Kaylee, I'll go straight over to you for that one, and then I'd love to give some tips once you're free.
Mm-hmm. And again, yes, when I saw this question, I thought, oh yes, that is a tricky one, because can we say no without hurting their feelings? I think is a
Good
question as
question.
well. And I think at some stages we can't really avoid hurting children's feelings when we say no, because naturally they are going to be disappointed because they're trying to build their independent skills and they want things their way. And we're trying to teach them the skills of turn taking, patience, gratitude, and those aren't fully developed in the early years. So this is something I think we have to acknowledge, that what is the wider purpose of us saying no sometimes is for them to develop the skills that they need for the world and also build their resilience. So I think a great way to respond to this is using a strategy called emotion coaching, and which is really when their feelings are hurt because they're not able to do something or have something, then we just validate the way they're feeling. So, I can see you're feeling sad. I would feel sad if I couldn't have that toy too. However, then followed by the justification of why not. So sometimes when it's we say no because children want something that they can't have, if we can provide an explanation around that, but also very much validate the way they're feeling, because sometimes children will be upset, they will be disappointed. We can't shield them from experiencing those emotions, because they are part of all of our human experience as both children and adults. But the more connected they are to the key adults, the better they will be able to move through those feelings, understand them, and build the resilience at the end of it.
Absolutely. And it's in some respects, we've got to teach our children that the no's might come and there might be things that we can't do and we can't access, or we're not allowed to do at that moment. But it's about explaining the whys when possible, when the child is able to connect. So a child might say, I don't want to wash my hands, I'm not going to wash my hands. And the adult might have to say, no, wait, it's time for us to wash our hands. But what you want to do is take that no and make a bridge over it. So once we've washed our hands, we're going to go and enjoy our snack. And you chose the watermelon today, and we already cut it and it's already ready at the table. So you're trying to jump over that small, tiny experience that might be a little negative and get to the more positive or the more favored position. And when you're talking about a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, they're not necessarily going to remember it for an extended period. So sometimes mummies and daddies and listeners out there, we might have to say no, but let's go around it. What are we getting to next? What is the importance of this? Or mummy said no this time because I've got to keep you safe. Or daddy
Mm.
said no this time because it's your little brother's turn and we're going to have another turn later. You've got to support them emotionally and make sure that they feel confident and secure in the environment around them, and that the reason that that no came was out of love or out of protection.
Mhm.
Okay, let's go to question 5, Bhavna. I hope we helped you there. Moving on to our question number 5, which is from Mahi. Okay, Mahi. This is a very tricky one, and especially I can imagine this situation is when you just need to leave the house to go to school, or you've really got to get to that dentist visit, or you've got a meeting and you've absolutely got to go. I'm here with you on this one. So Mahi says, my daughter keeps herself busy, usually by singing, whilst we try to do something. I keep telling her politely to get back to her task, but to no avail. How can I get her attention? Now, Maggie shared a little bit more behind this. I know we only have a small amount of characters in our questioning. She actually said that when they're trying to leave the house, the little girl is singing and dancing and playing, and mummy's saying things like, please, will you put your shirt on? Please, can we put our trousers on? Please, can we tidy up? It's time to put our shoes on. So, mummy's really mustering up all the patience that she's got and using all of her polite terminology, but little one just won't get ready. Kaylee, what are we going to do?
Yeah, and this is a common thing we see, especially with those morning routines when we are in a rush and we do need to be somewhere and there isn't that flexibility of time. I think there are a few ways you can approach this, and I think it depends on further unpicking the situation a little bit. But as it is presented, I think if she's singing and she's playing, depending on her age, then she's not actually tuning in and listening to the instructions. And so the first thing I would be thinking is, have we captured her attention? Are we speaking to her from another room and shouting across, and she's just not really engaging with what it is that we're asking her to do? So the first thing is, are we going over to her, coming down to her level, making that eye contact and supporting that facilitation of getting dressed? Because it sounds like she still needs some support in doing that in the time that's been allocated. You could have things like visual timers. In Sometimes parents use sound timers. They'll come in the morning, make sure you have her attention, explain what the expectations are and how long we've got. When the sound timer gets to the bottom of here, we need to have you fully dressed, and that way she's still able to have fun, but also knows the expectations and the routine. And I think another option is potentially making getting dressed into a game, which is hard because we don't always have the energy first thing in the morning to do that. So that's understandable, but equally, if we can bring some enthusiasm into it so that it becomes a game, then she might just buy into that being a fun thing in the morning until it becomes part and parcel of the everyday routine. But I feel like Laura might have some more tips and advice for us on this.
So absolutely, I do enjoy the morning game. Now, just
Mm.
as you've mentioned, it might have to be a little bit after your double espresso, getting you going in the morning. But so, for example, it's often with my daughter. Now, my daughter's already 4 years old, but what we do is, mommy's going to brush her teeth if you could put your left sock on. Mommy's going to comb her hair if you could put your right sock on. Now, she's really into her left and her right, so that's something that stimulates and interests her. But it's just giving her those reminders that there are jobs that are for her to do, but also the adult is doing a job at the same time. So I find this one is also very helpful at bedtime. Often, when a child doesn't want you to leave them, doesn't want you to step away from them, wants you to stay in their room, you need to give them tips and ideas about what you're going to be doing. So I always tell my daughter that I'm going to do the laundry or I'm going to do the dishes. And I know she's not particularly interested in that because children want to know, What are you doing in that moment when I'm being asked to do something else? And if they understand there's a job for you, a job for me, back and forward, they might be encouraged to be party to that game. Another thing I would say is try to do everything 10 minutes earlier than expected. Find those surprise 10 minutes at the end and then take 6 minutes to play before you walk to the car. So if you can shift your whole morning routine, and I know it's really hard in the morning, but shift your morning routine about 10 minutes earlier so that to everybody's surprise, you're ready a few minutes before leaving, then you have time to play with the Barbie or build the Lego tower or whatever it is that your child was interested in doing. So you just have a few moments shared together because our children are desperate for our attention. And actually, as busy mummies, busy daddies, we're always feeling a little bit of guilt that perhaps we don't have the time. We're always rushing off to this meeting or that meeting. And I can guarantee those few morning minutes, whether it was 5 or 6 that you managed to spend together, will stay with your child for the rest of the day. They'll remember daddy sitting and playing with them in the morning, or they'll remember mommy taking extra time to read their book before you went to school. And it's those precious moments or those mini captures that we want to be able to push into our children's memory so that they understand that mommy and daddy are absolutely part and parcel to what we're doing. And they're interested. Mommy and daddy are interested in what I'm passionate about. Okay, our next question comes from one of our viewers today, and it's a new question. So, Rashna, I believe you're listening out there. Hello, good afternoon, Rashna. Rashna's asked, what are some useful transition strategies when trying to teach them to focus on a task, especially if it's not of their choice? So, I'm imagining the situation is that we need to do a certain task, and the child is in the middle of play, and we need to stop that play, even just for a short moment, go across to the other task. So let's say it is brushing their teeth or putting their shoes on or packing their lunchbox. And mommy or daddy, so Rajna, mommy, needs the child to stop, go to the next task, and then perhaps come back again. Dr. Kaylee, what should we do?
Yeah, there's different things we could do in this situation, and I can imagine this is the hot topic of how do we get children to do things that they don't want to do, which is part and parcel of some of those morning routines, when they are really wanting to engage in play. And so it depends on the specific situation in terms of what the activity is and why they might not want to do it. Are they tired? Are they restless? Have they not had as much time in the activity that they were doing previously that they were really engrossed in? So there's a lot of factors that might play into the reason they don't want to engage in a new activity. And I think that is something to consider in the situation, because different strategies might apply. For example, if they are doing something that they're really enjoying and then we move them away very quickly, then you're likely to see some resistance to that, in the same way we would respond like that as adults when we're really enjoying something. If we quickly get moved on, it's like, oh, I feel really disappointed now. And so children express that. And then that can lead to us feeling very stressed in the morning, and sort of then we get behind with our schedule. So if it is a case of it's transitioning from something they do want to do to something they don't, one of the things that's really important, which Laura touched upon earlier, is the time reminder. And so this is something that could be used as a strategy. So I'm going to give you another 5 minutes before we need to move on to, and then a reminder of that time that, right, you've got 2 minutes left, and then we'll be going on to do A, B, and C. And that's a really important thing, just so they can prepare themselves. They still will be disappointed, but when it becomes part and parcel of the routine and they understand the boundaries around that and what the expectations are, it will get easier over time. But as a starting point, I think make sure you remind them beforehand, and also validate the way they're feeling if they are disappointed about it, but explain why it is that we need to do it if they're at an age where they can process and understand that, and you just encourage them. and try to remain in a calm space when they show that disappointment as well, because this is something when our environment usually can erupt because it's something they don't want to do. We'll see a tantrum and then we're really stressed, and where do we go from there? So if we can anticipate these triggers, try to put things in place such as time reminders beforehand, and then try to remain calm, easier said than done, when they are expressing their disappointment. Anything you would like to add to that, Laura?
And I absolutely agree with everything that you've said there, and especially the adult's response is so critical. So sometimes in that morning period, just as you've referenced, you've got to get to work, you might have an incredibly important meeting, you can already feel you're going to be late, and the pressures are building, and you feel that level of stress, but try absolutely to push to the front of your mind that your child is 3 years old or 2 years old. Their ability to process, their cognition, their perception of what's going on around them is incredibly different to yours. Their agenda is completely different to yours. So if you can try to get yourself in that relaxed position of, okay, this is happening, allow it to happen, and try to use some of your tips and strategies that we've talked about today. But if it doesn't work, don't stop with them. Keep practicing, keep using those same techniques, those same strategies, because slowly one of them might work, or a second part of it might work. The child will start to understand and start to on board with what your mission or your agenda is without necessarily understanding that that's what's happening. Rashna, I hope that was helpful for you. And we have another question from one of our viewers. Our next question is from Virginie. Hello there. Virginie has asked, despite all the negotiations and patience, allowing the child to take a toy to bed, reading stories, etc., my 3-year-old still refuses to go to bed at night, which often results in either a tantrum or mummy having to stay next to him until he sleeps, which is by then often too late for a 3-year-old. Do you have any tips? Absolutely. Virginie, I have a lot of experience with children and sleep training and sleep support, and I'm going to give you a few basic tips that I would go through. So the first thing is you need to set a period of time to achieve this. So from tantrums and mummy sleeping next to you, or the child, your son ending up in your bed, all the way to sleeping on their own, I would like you to give 10 weeks. Now you might think, goodness, 2.5 months. But I assure you, if you wait or if you follow the steps that I'm going to give you now, or follow through with some of them, at the beginning, and I'll slowly talk about what to add and what to increase, then you will absolutely get him to a comfortable state. So the first thing is to check that his sleep environment is suitable. So is it a calm sleeping environment? Does it have a little night light, for example? Does it have his water bottle? Does it have all of his needs? And then I'm going to take you on a journey. So the first thing that I like to do is, and you might think this is quite unusual for a 3-year-old, but a 3-year-old has been with us 1,000 days on this planet. So let's think of them as little. So 3-year-old is emotional at bedtime. They don't want to separate from their parent. They've had the magical day with you. They've had all of the trips, experiences, meals, snacks, playground, park, and then suddenly you say, now it's time to separate. Child feels that worry, feels that anxiety, often they can feel like neglect, that why am I being left alone? So what I tend to do is, in the first instance, I stay with them until they sleep. But what I try to do is I try to sit on the floor next to the bed or the crib or on a chair next to them. In the first few days, and actually, to be honest, for the first at least week, I stay so close that I'm almost touching them. So I put my hand on their arm or put my hand on their skin and let them know, I'm here, you can go to sleep. It's time for your sleep. So we get used to mommy being around or being close, but not in the same bed. So when it's the crib, often you'd have to find a mattress or a pillow and position yourself very close. You might just be stroking near their foot, but the child needs to physically sense you are in the room. In the second week, I ask you to do the same, but move your chair all the way to the edge of the room and use the open door technique. So your chair is at the open door, but still in the same room. Talk to them, comfort them, guide them, and allow them to sleep. So, mommy, it might take your laptop on your lap, or it might take a book because you might be there for a significant period of time. But what we're teaching the child is, first of all, comfort in that sleeping environment. So getting to sleep is a comfortable, normal part of our routines, telling them about how they're going to have a beautiful sleep and a beautiful dream. Still limited though. So I'm not at that point when you've got them into their bed and you're sitting on the chair. I don't want you to continue engaging. If they cry or if they alerten, you can just say, I'm here. But don't add to it. Don't offer to read the third or fourth story. Don't offer to show a video or a photo. All you're doing is being there as a physical presence. In the third week, I want you to dig out your baby camera. Okay. Baby camera is going to be placed in the bedroom, and first show your child. Okay. We go out of the room, and he stays in the room, you stay in the room, and you play with that camera, showing them that mommy can still hear everything that's going on in the bedroom and see everything that's going on in the bedroom, and she might not physically be there. Now, you might not have used that camera in a while. It might be somewhere in a cupboard, but get it out again. Okay, play with it. The child needs to understand that you're still there and you're still comforting them. So what I'd like you to do is practice that. So go out of the room, use the camera, and talk to them. So many of the cameras nowadays have that great two-way function that you can talk to them. I'm still here, mommy's just doing the dishes. I'm still here, mommy is doing the laundry. So they've got an auditory connection to you, no more physical, you're not in the room anymore, but they still feel like you're there. Each night, what I want you to do is talk to them. We're going to use the camera. Mommy's going to be watching you, and I'm going to go and carry on with my jobs. Please be sure to talk to the little one and explain that it's a job that you're going to do. Have it be something that's quite boring, actually. It needs to be dishes or laundry or ironing or something that they don't want to be involved with. Please don't talk to your child and say, I'm going out to the gym or I'm going out somewhere, because the child is absolutely connected to you emotionally, and even whether you're not physically in the room, they want to understand that somebody is still there looking over them and protecting them. Now, if there is a real chance that you are going out that evening and the child might wake up in that period, you need to be involving daddy or nanny or whoever else might be watching them, because they need to understand now daddy is watching you on the camera and making sure you're safe and seeing that you sleep well. So you've been through many weeks of this process. So the first week is being there and being close physical. The second week is moving your chair into the corner of the room. That might be for 1 or 2 weeks, mummies and daddies. The next week's adding the camera. But what I try to say is talk on that camera for the first half an hour, every at 10-minute intervals. I'm still here. Have sweet dreams, but stretch out the intervals. So the first time you're using the camera, you might speak every 6 minutes until they sleep. Second or third week, you might speak only every 15 minutes until they sleep. But they need to have that reminder, I'm still here. I'm still thinking of you, because your child is thinking of you. Child is thinking, where is mommy? What are they doing? Why aren't they with me? Why won't they sleep with me? If you follow these steps and take it slow and try not to rush, you might come across hurdles that you might need to go back to stage 2 of sitting in the chair. Try not to jump from camera stage all the way back through to physical connection. Try go from camera to back in the chair, then back in the chair to the camera stage once again. Eventually, once you're all comfortable, it'll be camera, but you won't be talking on it. The camera will be there and the child will understand. And then eventually, after a certain amount of time that you see suitable, it might be that the camera is turned off. As long as you can hear your child. Talk to your child about whether they're comfortable with the door open or with the door closed. And at 3 years old, they can support you with what their preference is on that. But absolutely reassure your child you're there for them, you're here with them, and you're going to support them. Virginie, I hope that was helpful. I hope that there were some tips in that one that you could be supported with. And if you have any further questions, do share them with us. Let's go ahead, Kaylee, to our next question, which is from Elisa. Elisa's daughter is almost 3 years old and suddenly, oh no, has started throwing tantrums. She asks mommy to go away. Mommy tries to understand, but she feels that she's being tested. What can we do here? How should she deal with that?
I think, first of all, to know that you're not alone in this situation, and tantrums are something that parents find very stressful, understandably so, but are typical of child development. So it's something every parent faces. as children are growing through the early years. And these tantrums do get less as they are older, which is the positive news here. But in terms of response to the tantrums themselves, so there's lots of different theories and ways of approaching this to really support children. Now, I'm going to go in from the angle of connection, which Laura's touched upon during the explanation of how to support sleep. And I think in a very similar way, it's all about creating a sense of safety for children. And so when children are having tantrums, they feel out of control. It may be that they haven't been able to communicate their needs effectively, or they're feeling really disappointed over a situation. And it seems to us as adults, the response seems very dramatic. But to them, this is a completely normal response. This is how they feel, and they haven't yet learned to regulate their emotions. They're still learning. That's another skill. It's a skill they learn from the adults around them. And the first step of self-regulation is something that's known as co-regulation. And co-regulation means that children learn to regulate themselves through the adults around them. And so how we respond, how we connect in these moments is how they're going to learn to manage this. And so one of the things that psychologists advocate is time in rather than time out. So what we mean by this is when a child is throwing a tantrum, they're in their most vulnerable, distressed state. And so what we have the inclination to do as adults is say, oh, okay, I'm going to leave you because this is too much to deal with, and it's causing me to feel stressed, understandably. However, when we do that, the message we send to children is that your emotions are too big and I'm not able to deal with them right now, and I'm going to leave you alone. And so they don't really learn to regulate. So one of the things that we would advocate is that during that time they're really distressed, they know that you're there. Yes, we need to wait for them to calm down before we can have any type of communication with them about why they're upset or moving on from that. We can't do that when they're distressed. But in that moment, just even as Laura was describing, being in the same room, I can see you're upset. I'm here. I'm here when you're ready. So they know you're there. They know that when they're ready to talk, when they are feeling calmer, you're there. You can connect with them, just giving them that reassurance in that moment to know that they will calm down eventually. But this is a part and parcel of them expressing their feelings. And when they are feeling a bit calmer, we then have that conversation. And one of the ways that you can support them with self-regulation is to label the way that they were feeling, because they won't yet understand that. And this is the very first stage of self-regulation, is for children to understand and label the emotion that they're experiencing, because then that helps them to move on to think about how to manage those in the future and different ways to deal with it. So those are the two things: to remain connected so they know you are there, even though you might not be able to physically hug them in that moment if they're projecting that they want their space. Yeah, okay, you can take a few minutes, but I'm here for when you're ready for that connection. And then we label the emotion, and then we talk through the boundaries after that. So then we can have our boundary setting. If they have displayed behaviors that we really didn't want to see, or we're really disappointed with, then we have those conversations when they are calm. And as we touched upon earlier, explain that the reason for this boundary is usually because of their safety. And so it comes from a place of love and care.
Absolutely. Elisa, I'd also like to just add that perhaps sometimes, yes, our children might be trying to test us. Absolutely, that can be the case, but we need to be the incredibly strong ones so that we can be tested. Right, right, very, very far, should I say? Children are, it's their actual truthfully, it's their job to test us, because they've got to find out what are all the boundaries, what are all the barriers, how far can I take this, how far should I take this, what happens in a favorable situation, what happens in a non-favorable situation. The children have got to learn about their world around them and got to learn what the environment could produce for them in a great outcome, and what might be not so favorable. Let's move on to our final question of Tricky Thursdays today. We're on March 3rd, and I'd like to hear from Aisha. Aisha is asking, how can I teach my toddler that hitting is bad? Okay, Kaylee, I'll let you go first on that one.
Mhm. So I think this again is a common problem that parents experience in early years, because this is the stage where you do see hitting and pushing and biting and the behaviors that we really don't want to see in children. However, this again is part and parcel of their development as they're growing up in the early years. So one of the things with teaching children that hitting is bad is going to be absolutely dependent on their age, and where they are at the stage in the morality and understanding the difference between right and wrong, but also the level of empathy that they've developed, because children are very much ego focused. They are very much focused on themselves, particularly in the early years. So there's only so much they're able to attend to the feelings of others, and this develops over time, again with adult support. So a couple of the questions that I would be asking around this is, firstly, exactly how old are they? Secondly, are they able to communicate their needs? Because we usually see hitting more frequently from children that struggle to express themselves. So it might be that they struggle to use language, so they don't feel fully understood by their peers. And we'll find that these children usually interact better with adults who are able to understand their needs a little more and come to meet them. But with children, when it comes to things like sharing, they might not have the language to say, I want that toy, please can I have a turn? I don't have those language skills yet. So what is the quickest way of getting that? Okay, I will hit, because then that gives me what I need. So this is a process of them trying to get their needs met, and it very much comes down to, when there has been an incidence of this, is just sitting with them, depending on their age, and having those conversations with children, but also noting if there are any barriers to the communication. Do the adults in their environment know about those barriers, or sort of what's been going on for them? And do the adults in nursery also have tips for you on how that's supported in the nursery and things that you could use at home as well? Because this is something that will take a little bit of time for children to understand, but often going to what the trigger is can help us to unpick some of that. So we might be able to find a different way for children to communicate who are struggling, like through visuals, prompts, gestures, which might reduce some of the hitting. Do you have any other tips on that one, Laura?
Kaylee, I just also, everything that you're saying is resonating in the fact that children, they just don't have that time, or they don't feel they have time to communicate what they're feeling. So it's very easy to snatch a toy away, or to hit, or to push, instead of taking the time to say, no, thank you, or that's mine, or it's my turn. So in the nursery, we tend to do a lot of that, equipping them with the children with the words, no, thank you, and actually teaching them to use signs and symbols to say that my need is also important, or it's my turn, you're next. So it's very important to help with teaching the children about those strategies, and about the ways that we can communicate quickly that wouldn't always involve language. I think we're going to end our session there for today. So we've had a lot of time talking and answering all of your questions. We've been very, very fortunate to listen to Dr. Kaylee's 5 essential tips on building listening skills and attention. Kaylee, I've really enjoyed today's session. I've been very, very fortunate to spend it with you, and thank you for sharing all of your information. I hope that our listeners out there will be able to share some comments and reflections on today's session and add some more questions if you would like us to focus on different tips, different techniques and strategies. Today it's been me, Laura Partinen, and I'm Nursery Manager at Jumeirah International Nursery in Al Safa, and Dr. Kaylee, who's Head of Positive Education at Sunmark School. Kaylee, would you like to give some closing words?
Yeah, absolutely. I've really enjoyed this session. I've learned a lot from the strategies that you're using in nursery and the things that you're using to support their attention and listening. Also, some of the games you're playing, the visuals you use, the strategies. And I think, a key thing that came through this session, even though the focus was on attention and listening, and we covered some of those tools, it was very much connection, patience and understanding where children are at and what our expectations are of them. So for me, it's been very insightful, and I've really enjoyed doing this session with you this afternoon.
Thank you very much. And to our listeners, thank you ever so much for your time today. We've really enjoyed sharing it with you. We're going to meet you again for the next Tricky Thursday session. Take care, stay safe, and we'll be seeing you soon.
Thank you.